Thank you for joining me on my Get It series. This is video number 2, Love Others. Here's a quote. Mature love involves growing from a state of receiving much and giving little toward a state of cheerfully giving everything and demanding nothing in return. Close quote. That's by Dr. Richard Strauss. And another one, it takes courage to love, but pain through love is the purifying fire which those who love generously know. We all know people who are so much afraid of pain that they shut themselves up like clams in a shell and giving out nothing, receive nothing, and therefore shrink until life is a mere living death. I love the person who said that. Her name is Eleanor Roosevelt. And here's a story. This is about brotherly and sisterly love. The violent grinding of brakes suddenly applied and the harsh creaking of skidding wheels gradually died away as the big car came to a stop. Eddie quickly picked himself up from the dusty pavement where he had been thrown and looked wildly around for Linda. Where was his little sister? He had been holding her by the hand when they started to cross the street. The next moment he saw her under the big car that had run them down. With one bound, the boy was under the car, trying to lift the child. "You better not try, son," said a man gently. "Someone's gone for help." "She's not dead, is she?" Eddie begged. The man stooped and felt the little pulse. "No, my boy," he said slowly. A policeman came, dispersed the collecting crowd, and carried the unconscious girl into a nearby store. Eddie's folded coat made a pillow for her head until the ambulance arrived. He was permitted to ride in the ambulance with her to the hospital. Something about that sturdy, shabbily dressed boy, only 10 years old, and his devotion to his little sister touched the hearts of the hospital attendants. "We must operate at once," said the surgeon after a brief preliminary examination. "She's been injured internally and lost a great deal of blood." He turned to Eddie, who stood close by. "Where do you live, son?" Well, Eddie told him that their father was dead and that their mother did day work. He didn't know where. "Well, we can't wait to find her," said the surgeon, "because by that time it might be too late." So Eddie waited in the sitting room while the surgeons worked on little Linda. After what seemed like an eternity, a nurse emerged from the operating room. "Eddie," she said kindly, "your sister is doing very badly and the doctor wants to give her a transfusion. You know what that is?" Eddie shook his head. "Well, Linda has lost so much blood that she cannot live unless someone gives her his. Will you do it for her?" Eddie's face grew paler and he gripped the knobs of the chair hard. For a moment he hesitated, then, gulping back his tears, he nodded and stood up. "That's a good boy," said the nurse. She patted his head and led the way to the elevator which took them to the operating room. No one spoke to Eddie except the nurse, who directed him in a low voice to prepare for the ordeal. The boy bit his quivering lip and obeyed. "Are you ready?" asked a man dressed in white, turning from the table over which he had been working. And for the first time, Eddie noticed Linda, lying there so still on the table, his little sister, and he was going to make her well. Eddie stepped forward quickly. 2 hours later, the surgeon looked up with a smile into the faces of the young interns and nurses who were engrossed in watching the great man work. "Fine," he said. "I think she will live." After the transfusion, Eddie had been told to lie quietly in a cot in the corner of the room. In the concern for the delicate operation, Eddie had been completely forgotten. "It was wonderful, doctor!" exclaimed one of the young interns. "A miracle!" Nothing, he felt in his enthusiastic recognition of the marvels of surgery, could be greater than the miracles of science. "I am well satisfied," said the surgeon with pride. There was a tug at his sleeve, but he didn't notice. And a little while later there was another tug, and the great surgeon glanced down to see a pale-faced little boy looking steadily up into his face. "Doctor," said Eddie timidly, "when do I die?" The interns laughed and the great surgeon smiled. "Why, what do you mean, my boy?" he asked kindly. Well, I thought when they took somebody's blood that he died, muttered Eddie. Well, the smiles faded from the lips of the doctors and the nurses, and the young intern who had thought there was nothing greater than the miracles of science caught his breath suddenly. This young boy had climbed to the very height of nobility and sacrifice, and had showed them a glimpse of the greatest miracle of all, unconditional love. There was a long pause before the surgeon answered softly, "You will both get well, Eddie, you and your little sister." All who witnessed Eddie's act of selfless giving would never forget him. I'd like to end with one short thought about loving others, because this is one of my top favorites on the list of things we need to get before we die. We will have lived honorable lives, my friends, if we learn how to truly love. To love God, to love ourselves, and to love and serve our brothers and sisters as we cheerfully give all we can in the service of others. And always remember to love yourself just the way you are.